You know, usually when we look at history, we kind of expect it to be a bit like, well, pouring concrete.
Right. Yeah, you want it to be solid.
Exactly. You lay the foundation, you wait for it to set, and then you just build the house right on top of it.
Sure.
And you assume that the baseline, the literal year zero, the very foundation of our entire modern calendar, was poured correctly by the architects of the past.
It's a completely natural assumption. I mean, it's the bedrock of how we measure our lives, our centuries, really, our progress as a species.
Yeah.
We like our history to be solid, visible, and neatly categorized. When we write down a year, we want to know it means exactly what we think it means.
But then you actually look at the blueprints.
Oh, yeah.
You get out the spirit level,
Yeah.
you check the corners, and suddenly you realize the concrete was poured on a massive slant.
A huge slant.
The dates just do not line up.
Yeah.
The astronomy fundamentally contradicts the history contradicts the theology, and suddenly you're standing on a structural landscape that is, honestly, completely warped.
Warped is the perfect word for it.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so thrilled to have you with us because the source material we're digging into today is just extraordinary.
It really is.
We are going to execute a complete, complex, and exhaustive structural analysis of this material. Think of this as almost like an academic dissertation-style breakdown, a forensic audit of time itself.
That's exactly the right mindset to have for this. The sheer density of the information we're synthesizing today crosses multiple disciplines.
Right.
It demands that rigorous dissertation-level breakdown you mentioned. We're looking at a body of research that forces us to question the very timeline of human history.
So we are going to completely deconstruct the historical timeline of the year zero. We'll dissect ancient astronomy and pit it against modern astrophysics.
Which gets wild, by the way.
Oh, absolutely wild.
Yeah.
And we are ultimately going to enter into some incredibly provocative esoteric cosmology and theoretical physics.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at everything from the miscalculations of the Gregorian calendar to the life cycles of stars, black holes, and even the controversial perspectives of a group referred to in the text as the Brotherhood, or Satanists.
Which brings up a vital baseline we need to establish before we take another step.
Yes, please.
Because this research delves so heavily into spiritual, esoteric, and metaphysical realms, our approach today is going to be strictly through an impartial academic lens.
Right. We are just the messengers here.
Exactly. We are analyzing the internal logic of these claims. We are here to report, analyze, and synthesize the arguments presented in the text.
Consider us totally objective observers. We aren't taking sides or endorsing any metaphysical worldviews.
No, not at all.
We're just tracking the data wherever it leads from, mundane Roman taxation records straight into alternative dimensions.
It's a heck of a journey.
So, okay, let's unpack this. If the foundation of our calendar is poured on a slant, like we said, how did that actually happen? Who poured the concrete for year zero?
Well, to understand the fundamental error that shifted human history, we have to look at the origins of the Gregorian calendar.
Okay.
According to the research, the initial mistake happened way back around 556 AD.
Wow, so a long time ago.
Yeah. It was created by a Roman abbot, and he took it upon himself to establish a definitive starting point for a brand new era, anchoring year one to the year he believed Christ was incarnated.
Which, on a purely administrative level, sounds like a logical project. You want a unified calendar for an expanding empire.
Right, it makes sense administratively. And to do this, he had to synchronize his New Year one with the existing Roman calendar.
And how did the Romans measure time?
The Romans measured years using a system called AUC.
AUC.
Okay,
Yeah.
It stands for Ab Urb Condita, which translates to from the founding of the city of Rome.
Okay, got it.
So the abbot calculated, based on whatever records he had at the time, that year one of our modern era coincided perfectly with the year 754 AUC.
So 754 years after Rome was founded becomes our year one. It sounds incredibly official. But the research immediately points out a massive, undeniable mathematical flaw in this abbot's work.
A huge flaw.
And what I love is that it doesn't use obscure religious texts to prove it. It uses the secular writings of the renowned ancient historian Flavius Josephus.
Yeah, Josephus is a goldmine for forensic historians.
Why is that?
Because he was incredibly meticulous. The research uses his accounts to give us 3 very specific interlocking historical markers to audit this Roman abbot's math.
Wait, so how do we actually know the abbot was wrong? I mean, didn't anyone double-check his math at the time?
That's the tragedy of historical bureaucracy, honestly.
Right.
Once a standard is adopted by the powers that be, the underlying math is rarely questioned. People just go with it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
But when you apply modern scrutiny to Josephus's records, the abbot's timeline completely collapses.
Okay, let's look at the first marker then. The reign of King Herod the Great.
Right. Herod is the crucial anchor point here.
Because the historical consensus is that Herod's death happened shortly after the birth of Jesus. That's the established sequence of events, right?
Exactly. Now, according to the Roman Senate's own irrefutable records, Herod was officially appointed king of Judea in the year 714 AUC.
Okay.
And Josephus explicitly records that Herod ruled for exactly 37 years.
All right, let's just do this a simple arithmetic here.
Yeah.
So 714 plus 37 equals 751.
Correct.
Or, I guess, depending on the exact months the transition of power happened, maybe 750 of Rome.
Which is an immediate catastrophic problem for our Roman abbot's timeline.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah. If Herod died in 750 or 751 AUC and Jesus was born before Herod died, then year 1 cannot possibly be 754 AUC.
It's physically impossible.
Right. Jesus would have been born 3 or 4 years before year 1.
So the abbot missed the mark by nearly half a decade.
At least.
But the research doesn't just stop at political reigns, which is great. It brings in marker number 2, which is where things get brilliantly precise.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
We move from Roman Senate records to hard astronomical data.
This is where the analysis becomes truly forensic. Josephus recorded a very specific, dark event at the very end of Herod's life.
What happened?
Well, just before his death, Herod grew deeply paranoid, as dying autocrats often do.
Sure.
And he ordered the execution of 2 prominent Jewish rabbis.
Okay.
And Josephus specifically notes a detail that is invaluable to modern astronomers. He writes that on the night of their execution, there was a lunar eclipse.
Oh, wow. And eclipses are basically nature's unforgeable timestamps?
Exactly.
You can't fake an eclipse. You can't alter a bureaucratic document to hide it.
Right.
And with modern astrophysics, you can calculate them backward with absolute precision to the exact hour they occurred thousands of years ago.
Precisely. You just run the models. And when modern astronomical models are applied to this historical window, they prove that a partial lunar eclipse occurred on the night of March 12th, moving into the 13th, in the year 750 AUC.
Let me guess. What happened in the sky in 751 AUC?
Absolutely nothing. The models show 0 lunar eclipses visible in Judea during that entire year.
So the eclipse gives us a definitive scientific pin in the timeline. The execution of the rabbis happened in March of 750 AUC.
Without a doubt.
Which brings us to marker number 3, closing the net completely. Passover.
Right.
Josephus notes that Herod died shortly after executing those rabbis, but crucially, he died just before the festival of Passover.
And again, we can track the ancient lunar calendar. In that specific year, Passover fell on April 12th, 750 AUC.
Look at how incredibly tight that window is.
I know, it's amazing.
The rabbis are executed under a lunar eclipse in mid-March. Herod dies less than a month later, before April 12th in 750 of Rome.
It leaves absolutely no room for debate. The Roman abbot was off by at least 4 years.
Oh.
The research concludes that Jesus, having been born before Herod's death, must have actually been born in late 5 BC.
Or, to use the Roman standard, the year 749 AUC.
Right. Furthermore, based on agricultural and taxation rhythms of the era, the birth likely occurred during the Autumn Feast of Tabernacles.
Which is absolutely nowhere near December 25th.
Not even close.
It is wild to me. It is exactly like someone sneaking into the Greenwich Observatory, setting the world's master atomic clock 4 hours fast, and the entire planet just accepting it for centuries.
That is a fantastic way to visualize it.
We just kept building history on top of it without ever opening the casing to check the original gears.
We've all been running on this slightly accelerated, warped timeline, but the source material isn't just correcting a historical trivia question for the sake of accuracy.
No, there's a point to all this.
There is a profound underlying reason this specific date is so heavily emphasized in the text.
Right, because once the actual timeline is established, the material introduces this concept of a time key and a spiritual seal.
Exactly. The central thesis here is that knowing the precise, mathematically sound timeline is critical because it reveals patterns.
Patterns that others were watching.
Right. It allows us to understand how adversarial esoteric groups, which the author refers to as the Brotherhood, how they actually operate. The argument is that these groups aren't dealing in vague prophecies or guessing games. They are meticulously tracking and anticipating major spiritual shifts using these exact, corrected historical and astronomical signs.
So if you are looking at the abbot's flawed calendar, you are completely blind to the patterns they are reading.
You'd miss everything.
You're looking at the wrong part of the sky at the wrong time in history.
Precisely. To understand the esoteric perspective later on, you first have to prove that the material timeline is flawless.
Which naturally leads us to the next massive question. If the birth date is wrong by 4 years, the entire timeline of everything that follows has to shift, right?
You would think so, yeah.
We have to move the whole calendar back. And the research doesn't just leave us hanging with the birth year. It actually cross-references Roman and biblical history to absolutely lock in this revised 5 BC timeline.
Yes, it does.
Bringing us to the synchronization of the historical ministries.
The author builds a formidable case here by presenting a series of rigorous mathematical proofs. They walk us through the major historical milestones, forcing them to align with the new 5 BC baseline.
Okay, let's examine the first proof. The age at the beginning of the public ministry. The Gospel of Luke, in chapter 3, explicitly states that Jesus was nearly 30 years old when he was baptized and began his work.
Okay, let's run the corrected math on that.
Right.
If the birth was in late 5 BC, and we have to remember that there is no year 0 in our calendar system.
Oh, right. It goes straight from 1 BC to 1 AD.
Exactly. So turning 30-year-old lands perfectly in late 25 AD.
Therefore, the baptism and the start of the ministry had to occur just before September of 25 AD.
Which seamlessly validates the second proof provided in the research, the massive reconstruction of Herod's temple.
Okay, how does that fit in?
This was one of the largest public works projects in the ancient world. The historical data cited notes that at a specific point during the ministry, the temple reconstruction had been ongoing for exactly 46 years.
And we know when that project started.
We do. Architectural and historical records show this immense project began roughly 19 or 20 years before the Christian era.
So let's do the math again. 20 BC plus 26 years brings us to exactly 46 years of construction.
Yep.
That places this specific interaction perfectly in mid-26 AD.
Which is a time when, according to our new timeline, the ministry would have been fully underway.
It's like watching a complex cipher suddenly decode.
It really is. The pieces are just snapping into place.
But the third proof is perhaps the most impressive because it relies entirely on rigid Roman bureaucracy. It concerns the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar.
This one is fascinating.
It really caught my eye. The research points out that the precursor, John the Baptist, began his own public ministry during this highly specific year of Tiberius's reign.
Now, here is where understanding ancient political structures is absolutely critical. Tiberius didn't just wake up one day and become sole emperor. He went through a period of co-regency. The aging Emperor Augustus pulled Tiberius into shared power to ensure a smooth transition.
Smart move.
Yeah. This co-rulership officially began around 11 to 12 AD.
Okay, so if we add 15 years to 12 AD, we get 27 AD.
Correct.
But wait, at first glance, that seems to completely break our newly established timeline.
How so?
Because John the Baptist had to start his work before the main ministry began, which we just locked in at 25 AD. If John starts in 27 AD, the whole theory falls apart.
It definitely appears to, until you factor in the abbot's 5-year calendar shift.
Oh.
See, when the original historians were recording these events, they were counting in real time. Their system didn't have the 6th century abbot's error baked into it yet.
That makes total sense.
So to translate their 27 AD into our modern corrected understanding, you have to subtract that 5-year shift.
Ah. You take the 27, subtract the 5, and you land precisely at 22 or 23 AD.
Exactly. Which gives the precursor a highly realistic 2 to 3 year head start to prepare the way before the primary ministry kicks off in 25 AD.
Wow. It brilliantly resolves what would otherwise be a massive historical discrepancy.
It really does.
And that corrected trajectory carries right through to the end of the narrative. The fourth proof, the year of death.
Let's hear it.
The research tracks the mentions of the annual Passover festivals during the ministry. There are 3 distinct Passovers recorded.
Which indicates a public ministry lasting roughly 3.5 years.
So if it started in late 25 AD, 3.5 years later makes the subject 33 years old, with the execution occurring during the Passover, which we know happens in mid-March of the year 29 AD. Everything balances perfectly.
Perfectly balanced.
But I have to pause here and ask a structural question about the author's intent.
Sure.
Why does a text that is ultimately going to dive into wildly esoteric, multidimensional concepts spend so much time obsessing over taxation timelines, co-regency dates, and temple construction schedules?
It's a phenomenal rhetorical strategy.
You think so?
Absolutely. What's fascinating here is the author deliberately uses the most mundane, unromantic, bureaucratic data imaginable to anchor seemingly supernatural events into concrete, undeniable human history.
Ah, so it's building credibility.
Right. It's essentially saying to the reader, look, I can balance the historical checkbook to the exact penny. I can cross-reference Roman senatorial decrees with lunar eclipses. So you need to trust me when we start looking up at the stars.
That is clever. By proving the math is flawless in the physical bureaucratic realm, the author earns the intellectual permission to lead you into the metaphysical realm.
Precisely.
Which is the perfect bridge into the next major section of our analysis. If the timeline is fixed and we are looking at the sky in late 5 BC, what exactly are we looking for? What was the Star of Bethlehem?
The material tackles this by first clearing the board of the most common, culturally ingrained misconceptions.
Good.
It immediately dismisses the two most extreme opposing views.
Right, the two polar opposites. On one end, you have people who argue it was a pure, localized miracle that breaks all laws of physics, just a glowing orb floating 50 feet off the ground that no scientist could ever explain.
Yeah, the purely supernatural argument.
And on the other end, you have the total skeptics who say you shouldn't take the text literally at all, that the star is just an utter myth, a poetic metaphor invented decades later to make the story sound more majestic.
And the author vehemently rejects both of those lazy explanations.
It also dismantles the artistic legacy that has heavily distorted our modern understanding. For instance, the Magi themselves.
Oh, this is a big one.
The research is quick to point out they were absolutely not kings.
No, not kings.
That was an embellishment added centuries later by European cultures to reflect their societal importance.
And the idea that there were exactly 3 of them is also a complete myth.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The number 3 only became standard because of the 3 specific gifts mentioned: gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Oh, I never thought of that.
But the research notes that Eastern traditions and historical realities of desert travel suggest a caravan of these highly respected figures would have been much larger.
How large?
Possibly 12 of these magi, traveling with a massive armed escort.
Wow. And we need to understand who the Magi actually were.
Right. They were Babylonian or Persian astronomers, astrologers, and mathematicians. In the ancient world, there was no division between those disciplines.
They were basically the premier elite scientists of their era, serving as advisors to empires.
Exactly. They didn't chase random glowing lights. They analyzed complex celestial mechanics.
The text also calls out how deeply visual art has messed up our understanding. It specifically points to Giotto's incredibly famous 14th century painting, which depicts the Star of Bethlehem as a massive blazing comet hovering directly over a manger.
Which is a fascinating case of historical contamination.
How so?
Giotto only painted it that way because he had recently witnessed a spectacular, terrifying flyby of Halley's Comet in his own lifetime.
He basically let his own recency bias rewrite an ancient historical event on canvas.
Exactly. He saw a comet, so he painted a comet.
But the author then pivots away from art and dives into the history of early scientific hypotheses. How have brilliant minds throughout history tried to solve this astronomical puzzle?
Well, it starts with the theologian Origen in the 3rd century, who actually proposed the comet theory centuries before Giotto painted it.
But the research completely shreds the comet theory using our newly established timeline.
It does.
It points out that Halley's Comet was indeed visible in the ancient world, but it appeared around 12 BC. That is an enormous 11-year mathematical error from our locked-in 5 BC timeline.
Furthermore, the author brings in cross-cultural data to disprove it.
Oh, the Chinese records.
Yes. The Chinese astronomical bureaus were the most meticulous celestial observers of the ancient world. They recorded every guest star or comet with bureaucratic precision.
And their pristine records completely conflict with a massive comet appearing in the Judean sky during that specific 5 BC window.
So comets are definitively out.
Okay, the material then fast forwards to the late 16th century to the legendary Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe. In 1572, Brahe witnessed something unimaginable: a supernova.
A literal star exploding in the Milky Way.
The physical description of this event is staggering. The explosion was so violently immense that the dying star became 10 billion times brighter than our own sun.
10 billion?
Imagine the sheer terror of that. You were a farmer in 1572. You were walking outside at high noon, the sun is shining, and you look up to see a second, piercing, diamond-hard point of light in the blue sky.
It would be horrifying.
And it stays there, visible in broad daylight for nearly 20 months.
It would have fundamentally shaken your understanding of the universe.
Definitely.
And what's crucial for our timeline is that modern radio astronomy has actually found remnant evidence of novas occurring around 5 BC.
Ah.
So a supernova becomes a scientifically viable, naturally occurring candidate that doesn't immediately contradict our timeline.
Okay, but then the narrative brings in Johannes Kepler in 1603.
Cool.
Kepler is a titan of astronomy.
Oh, yeah.
He observes this incredibly rare planetary conjunction, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, all aligning incredibly closely in the night sky. And Kepler, as brilliant as he was, makes a huge erroneous leap in logic.
He did.
He thought that this specific, tight planetary alignment actually caused a distant star to go supernova.
It was a classic case of flawed correlation. With modern astrophysics, we know definitively that planets aligning in our tiny solar system have absolutely no gravitational or energetic ability to trigger a distant star light years away to explode.
Right. But while Kepler was wrong about the mechanism, he was entirely onto something regarding the importance of the planetary alignment itself.
He was on the right track, yeah.
But here is where I have to step in with the massive logical flaw that the source material itself bravely brings up. The Jerusalem problem.
Yes, the Jerusalem problem.
Let's say it was a Tycho Brahe-level daylight supernova or a massive trailing comet. If it was that bright, that spectacular, and that obvious, why didn't the locals in Jerusalem see it?
It's a great question.
Why didn't King Herod look out of his palace window, see a second sun, and say, hey, what is that giant fireball in the sky?
Yeah.
The records explicitly state that the Magi had to arrive in Jerusalem, knock on the door, and ask where the new king was. The local scholars and politicians were completely clueless.
Clueless.
Furthermore, how does a supernova move from north to south and then just hit the brakes and stop over a specific town? Stars don't do that.
No, they certainly do not. And that paradox is the very crux of the argument.
Yeah.
You've hit on the exact synthesis the author is building toward. The fact that the locals in Judea didn't notice it, and the fact that it appeared to behave dynamically to the Magi, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the phenomenon wasn't just a standard, universally obvious bright light.
Right. Wasn't a flare in the dark.
Exactly. It had to be a phenomenon that required deeply specialized, highly educated mathematical interpretation. It required a PhD-level understanding of the invisible mechanics of the sky.
Which perfectly bridges us into the modern astronomical synthesis. This is where the research introduces two heavy-hitting, heavily conflicting modern theories from prestigious university presses that attempt to solve this mystery of movement and invisible meaning.
Let's look at the first one from Mark Kidger, a British astronomer published by Princeton University Press.
Okay.
Kidger proposes what he calls the multiple stars theory. He argues that the Star of Bethlehem wasn't a single isolated event, but a highly complex, multi-year sequence of 4 distinct celestial signals.
And context is everything here. All of these signals take place within the constellation of Pisces.
Right.
Kidger argues that in the astrological geography of the ancient Middle East, Pisces was understood as the specific cosmic sign representing the nation of Judea.
Which is a vital detail. The Magi, living in Babylon, are watching the sky. If something happens in Pisces, they interpret it as happening in Judea.
Okay, so Kidger outlines his 4 signals. First, in 7 BC, there was a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces.
To clarify for the listener, a triple conjunction is an incredibly rare orbital dance.
How rare?
Very. It happens due to retrograde motion, where Earth's faster orbit makes outer planets appear to move backward. In a triple conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn appear to pass each other, reverse course, and pass each other again, and then move forward to pass a third time, all within a short period.
It's like a cosmic neon sign flashing 3 times.
Yeah.
That's signal 1.
Yeah.
Then Kidger says signal 2 happens in February of 6 BC. A massive, tight grouping of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. Again, right in the heart of Pisces.
So Kepler actually gets a partial point for recognizing the importance of that grouping.
It does. Then signal 3. Exactly 1 year later, February 5 BC, a tight conjunction of Jupiter and the Moon in Pisces.
Okay.
And finally, the climax, signal 4. Kidger proposes that a subtle, faint supernova finally appeared in the sky.
A faint one.
Right. Not a blinding daylight explosion, but a faint nova that a casual observer like Herod wouldn't even notice.
But a highly trained Persian astronomer who had been tracking this specific sequence in Pisces for years absolutely would.
It's a compelling narrative. The Magi see this four-part sequence, they read the astrological geography and realize it's all pointing to Judea.
So they pack their massive caravan.
Yeah, they travel across the desert, and as they finally arrive in the region, the natural nightly rotation of the Earth makes this faint nova appear to move south across the sky, leading them from Jerusalem toward Bethlehem.
It's an incredibly elegant theory.
I loved it. It solves the why didn't Herod see it problem, and it solves the physical movement problem using natural Earth rotation.
It is elegant, but the research immediately introduces a fierce, almost devastating counterargument.
Oh boy.
Enter Michael Molnar, an astronomer whose work was published by Rutgers University Press. Molnar offers what the material refers to as a bombastic rebuttal to Kidger's entire premise.
Oh, he completely nukes Kidger's foundation.
He really does.
Molnar points to ancient primary sources, including the renowned geographer and astronomer Ptolemy, and says, wait a minute. The astrological sign for Judea wasn't Pisces, it was Aries.
And if the sign for Judea is actually Aries, then Kidger's entire beautiful four-part sequence of Pisces means absolutely nothing to the Magi regarding a king in Judea.
It's happening in the wrong cosmic zip code.
Exactly.
Molnar takes a completely different, heavily text-based approach. He ignores supernovas entirely and goes straight back to the original Greek translations of the historical texts. He looks at how ancient Greek astronomers actually describe celestial movements.
Molnar focuses entirely on the king-making planet, Jupiter. He calculates that Jupiter had a highly significant conjunction with the moon in April of 6 BC.
Okay.
But crucially, this conjunction happened so close to the sun's glare that it would have been entirely invisible to the naked eye.
Meaning only a master mathematician sitting in Babylon calculating orbital trajectories on clay tablets could have known it was happening.
Exactly. But the real key to Molnar's theory is retrograde motion. He translates the ancient Greek text not as a physical star flying through the air, but as a description of planetary orbits.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. Jupiter rises in the east, begins its apparent retrograde motion moving backward, east to west, as Earth overtakes it, and then, importantly, it stations.
To put a visual on this for anyone listening right now, imagine you are on the highway passing a slower car. As you speed past it for a brief second, that slower car appears to be moving backward relative to your window.
Right.
That's retrograde motion. But right at the edges of that illusion, the car appears to just stop and hover perfectly still in your window. That is what astronomers call stationing.
That's a great example. And Molnar's astronomical models prove that Jupiter did exactly this. It stationed, it stopped moving against the backdrop of the stars around June or July of 5 BC.
Wow.
And depending on the observational thresholds of the Magi, it could have technically been considered stationed right up until September of 5 BC.
Which is the exact time the revised calendar calculated for the birth. Imagine standing in the Babylonian desert in 5 BC. You don't have a telescope.
No, you just have math.
You have math, geometry, and deep generational understanding of the symbolic language of the sky. You decode a message hidden entirely in the invisible mathematical retrograde motion of a single planet.
Unbelievable.
A message so profoundly important that you pack trunks full of wildly expensive gold and resins, you hire mercenaries, and you travel for months across the harsh, dangerous known world based solely on math and symbolism.
It speaks to a level of conviction that is almost unfathomable to the modern mind. As the author concludes on this section, perhaps the explanation isn't found just in the physical photons of light hitting the retina.
No, it's something deeper.
Right. It's found in the profound symbolic interpretation of a cosmic clockwork that we, as a modern society, have largely forgotten how to read.
Which brings us to the most provocative and, frankly, the most bizarre transition in our source material today.
Buckle up, everyone.
Yeah, if you thought ancient planetary math was heavy, we are venturing into esoteric cosmology.
There we go.
We are going to look at the perspective of the group the text explicitly refers to as the Brotherhood, or Satanists. Again, just a reminder, our analysis today maintains a purely objective academic boundary. We're exploring what the material claims this group believes and analyzing their internal logic.
That's a crucial boundary to maintain as the concepts become increasingly metaphysical. So what does the research claim this Brotherhood actually believes?
Well,
it claims they possessed what they called a time key. They were using the exact same numerological, astrological, and historical data we just spent all this time breaking down.
they were looking at the same data.
Exactly. They knew a massive paradigm shift was coming, and they knew it was imminent.
Because they knew the precursor, John the Baptist, had been born. And according to the strict mathematics of this time key, John's birth triggered a rigid, unchangeable 6-month countdown to the main event.
To explain how this esoteric group interpreted the world around them during that specific historical window, the material uses a very striking, highly effective analogy.
I love this analogy. Let's walk through it. Imagine you walk into an enormous, empty banquet hall. Just bare walls, a wooden floor, high ceilings.
Right, it means nothing.
It's just empty space. But suppose you walk into that exact same hall 3 days later, and suddenly you see teams of people feverishly scrubbing the floors. You see florists carrying in massive, elaborate centerpieces.
Okay.
You see carpenters building a raised stage and caterers setting up tables with fine china. Even if no one says a single word to you, the logical deduction is incredibly obvious. A massive, important event is about to happen in this room.
The author refers to this state as the fullness of times.
The fullness of times.
Right. The Brotherhood looked at the world in 5 BC and saw the banquet hall being actively decorated. They saw the unprecedented geopolitical stability of the Roman Empire, the massive infrastructure of new roads connecting the known world, the universal adoption of the Greek language, combined with these hyper-specific, once-in-a-millennium celestial alignments of Jupiter and Saturn.
They saw the physical and political world being perfectly engineered for a transmission of information. They were observing the symptoms of an approaching singularity.
But here is where the material makes its massive esoteric leap. This group doesn't believe the Star of Bethlehem was just a planet stopping in retrograde.
No, they don't.
They don't believe it was just a faint supernova in Pisces. They believe it was a literal, physical, dimensional portal, a catastrophic tear in the fabric of space-time itself.
And just when you think the text is going to veer off into pure fantasy, it does something entirely unexpected. We cross the bridge from magic straight into advanced mathematics.
We do.
We are entering theoretical physics meets spiritual phenomena. The text literally halts its historical and esoteric analysis to give the reader a highly accurate crash course in astrophysics.
It's a jarring structural choice, I have to say.
It is.
But it provides a genuinely accurate mini-lecture on stellar death to build the vocabulary for its next argument. To understand their concept of a dimensional tear, the author insists we first have to understand how stars actually die.
Right. Stars, like our sun, are essentially massive, continuous nuclear fusion engines. They spend billions of years crushing hydrogen atoms together to make helium.
Yeah.
This fusion process releases the immense light and heat we see. It's a delicate balance between the outward explosive force of the fusion and the inward crushing force of the star's own immense gravity.
But eventually, the gas tank runs to empty, the hydrogen runs out. For a star the size of our sun, the material notes it dies relatively peacefully.
What does that look like?
It sheds its outer layers into a beautiful glowing cloud called a planetary nebula, and the core that is left behind shrinks down into what astrophysicists call a white dwarf.
And a white dwarf is incomprehensibly dense. The research points out it is roughly the size of the Earth, but contains the mass of the entire sun.
Which is hard to even picture.
Meaning, if you took a single cubic centimeter of a white dwarf, something the size of a sugar cube, it would weigh about 1 ton.
It's a car squeezed into a sugar cube.
Exactly. But that's just what happens to small stars. The physics get much more extreme. What happens when massive stars many times larger than our sun, run out of fuel?
Massive stars don't stop at helium. Their gravity is so intensely crushing that they just keep fusing heavier and heavier elements to keep the engine running.
Okay, like what?
They fuse helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, all the way up the periodic table to neon, magnesium, silicon, well, until they hit iron.
And iron is the cosmic brick wall. Fusing iron doesn't release energy, it absorbs it.
Right.
So the nuclear engine suddenly turns off, instantly, and without the outward pressure of that continuous nuclear explosion pushing against the crushing weight of the star's own gravity.
The star collapses inward in a matter of seconds.
It hits that iron core, bounces and ricochets outward in the most violent event in the known universe. A supernova.
Which leaves behind the core. If that remaining core is slightly larger than our sun, the electrons and protons are literally crushed together to form a neutron star.
Okay.
These are incredibly dense, billions of tons per cubic centimeter, and they spin wildly, emitting intense beams of radiation we call pulsars.
But what if the core left behind is truly massive? What if it's over 3 times the mass of our sun?
Then the gravitational collapse cannot be stopped by any physical force in the universe. Not even the atomic structure can hold it up. It collapses infinitely inward. It becomes a black hole.
The author notes the first black hole was discovered in 1972, Cygnus X1. And here's where the physics get truly weird. Black holes literally break the known laws of physics.
They absolutely do.
Their gravity is so immense that they bend light. Think of placing a heavy bowling ball in the center of a trampoline. The fabric warps deeply. Now roll a marble across it. The marble's path curves down toward the heavy ball.
That's a great analogy.
A black hole warps the fabric of space-time so severely that light itself, photons, are pulled into a curvilinear path. Nothing escapes. It is a point of infinite density, a singularity where the math of our universe just simply stops working.
But the material doesn't stop at black holes. It uses the math of black holes to introduce the theoretical concepts of the white hole and the wormhole.
Oh, this is where it gets good.
Because physicists have asked a very logical question. Mathematically speaking, if a black hole acts as a cosmic drain, sucking matter and energy out of our observable universe, well, where does it all go?
Right. The drain has to empty somewhere. You can't just delete mass and energy from existence.
General relativity, Einstein's monumental theory, actually allows for the theoretical existence of a wormhole. Think of taking a piece of paper, drawing a dot on each end, and then folding the paper in half so the dots touch.
I'm visualizing it.
You poke a pencil through both dots. You've just created a tunnel connecting two completely separate regions of space-time. The black hole is the entrance. The exit, theoretically, is a white hole.
A white hole is the exact mathematical inverse of a black hole. If a black hole is a cosmic vacuum that nothing can escape, a white hole is a cosmic geyser that nothing can enter.
Exactly.
It violently spits out infinite energy, light, and matter from another dimension or another point in space-time. And the text specifically cites a brilliant breakthrough in theoretical physics from 1986.
What was the breakthrough?
Physicists found a specific solution to Einstein's field equations that described a traversable wormhole, meaning mathematically a traveler or energy could pass through this interdimensional tunnel without being instantly crushed to death by tidal gravitational forces.
So how does the author synthesize this heavy, theoretical astrophysics with the spiritual narrative of the Brotherhood?
It's wild.
The claim is that the Brotherhood views the Star of Bethlehem not as a celestial body, but as the temporary opening of a white hole in our atmosphere.
They believe that the physical birth of this entity required so much raw spiritual energy entering the physical plane from an outside dimension that it caused a literal physical rupture in the fabric of space.
A rupture.
The star was actually a glimpse into another dimension, an explosion of luminous energy, a white hole that allowed the spiritual realm to manifest physically. It wasn't just light bouncing off a retina. It was an open door between worlds.
It's a fascinating attempt to use the extreme boundaries of quantum physics and general relativity to provide a modern scientific vocabulary for what the ancients simply called magic or miracles.
Yeah.
But this is exactly where the research material takes a sudden, highly unusual, and deeply personal turn to validate the existence of these portals.
Yeah, I have to be completely honest here. I got severe whiplash reading this part of the source material.
Oh, I did too.
The shift in tone is jarring, to say the least. We go from calmly discussing Einstein's field equations and the mass of Cygnus X1 straight into the author recounting deeply bizarre, terrifying personal anecdotes to prove that interdimensional portals are real, active, and opening today.
The first anecdote the author provides is deeply disturbing. They describe attending a lecture where a speaker recounted witnessing an esoteric ritual performed by a Central American tribe. The purpose of the ritual was to initiate children into the priesthood. The description involves sewing animal skins together, anointing them with specific unguents, setting them on fire, and claiming this intense thermal and ritualistic energy physically opened a portal.
And the claim, which is reported with absolute seriousness, is that the priests literally threw the children into this fiery portal to be baptized by an entity waiting on the other side.
Threw them in.
The children would reportedly disappear entirely from our dimension and return minutes later. But horrifically, the text claims some children simply never returned.
They were permanently lost in the portal. It's a terrifying, nightmare-inducing anthropological claim.
And immediately following that horrifying claim of vanished children, the author abruptly shifts gears to an intensely personal, almost casually absurd claim.
Oh, the cat.
The cat. I could not believe my eyes when I read this paragraph. I burst out laughing, not because it's funny, but out of sheer shock.
It is shocking.
After heavily detailing Einstein, black holes, and terrifying fiery rituals of human sacrifice, the author writes, And I'm summarizing the exact sentiment here. Don't ask me to explain the exact physics of it, but my cat also crossed through a portal, so I know from personal experience this is all true.
Yeah, that happened.
It is wild. The narrative moves seamlessly from the highest, most rigorous levels of theoretical physics directly to a vanished house cat walking through a dimensional tear in a living room.
It's certainly a jarring tonal shift, but analytically it speaks to the author's absolute unwavering conviction.
I suppose so.
To them, these dimensional tiers aren't just ancient history or abstract theoretical math on a chalkboard. They are active, present, literal realities. And it is this exact conviction that allows the text to make its final, culminating connection regarding the life of Jesus.
Right. It applies the same spiritual physics, this exact mechanism of wormholes and portals, to the very end of his life.
Let's get into that.
The material examines the crucifixion, specifically the historical and biblical record that a deep darkness covered the entire land for 3 hours during the execution. The author explicitly points out that mathematically and astronomically this could not have been a solar eclipse.
No, definitely not.
A total solar eclipse only lasts a few minutes in any given location. It physically cannot last for 3 hours.
Therefore, the text argues it was another massive dimensional phenomenon. Just as a portal of immense light, a white hole opened at his birth to allow energy in, a portal of profound darkness opened at his death.
Okay, elaborate on that.
The author describes it as the physical spatial dimension of hell literally approaching the cross, overlaying our space-time, while the protective legions of the other dimension retreated.
Wow.
The darkness wasn't the physical shadow of the moon blocking the sun. It was the shadow of another dimension violently pressing against the fabric of our own.
Wow. Okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's synthesize this absolute dissertation we've just walked through. We started with a Roman abbot in 556 AD making a simple bureaucratic addition error.
Yep, a math mistake.
We used unforgeable lunar eclipses and ancient Roman taxation records to fix a massive 4-year gap in human history. We analyzed the invisible retrograde motion of Jupiter to explain how elite ancient Persian astrologers navigated the desert to find a king.
We covered a lot of ground.
And we somehow ended up deep in the theoretical physics of wormholes, white holes, and interdimensional tiers that swallow house cats and manifest as 3 hours of inexplicable crucifixion darkness.
It is a breathtaking, exhaustive journey through history, hard science, and esoteric theology. The material forces us to look closely at the exact intersection where the hardest, most rigid sciences meet the most fluid, esoteric spiritualities.
And it leaves me with one final, deeply provocative thought. Something for you to mull over as you go about your day.
I'd love to hear it.
We talked about how the intense, concentrated gravity of a black hole can physically bend light and break the fundamental laws of physics as we currently understand them.
Right.
If that is mathematically true out in the cosmos, is it possible that the historical miracles recorded across human history, documented by multiple disconnected cultures, aren't just poetic myths or mass hallucinations?
Oh, that's interesting.
What if they are simply localized, highly concentrated manipulations of space-time? Could what the ancient world called a spiritual manifestation or a divine intervention merely be a type of advanced quantum physics that our current scientific models simply don't have the math to categorize yet?
It's a paradigm-shifting question. Are we just waiting for our equations to finally catch up to the reality of ancient history?
Exactly. What if that solid, concrete foundation of history we talked about at the very beginning isn't solid matter at all? What if it's a fluid, deeply complex manipulation of space, time, and energy? Thank you for joining us on this incredibly complex, mind-bending journey today. Keep questioning the reality around you, keep pulling out the blueprints, and we will see you next time on The Deep Dive.